Hi, this is Mark Spencer from Ripple Training with a quick tutorial on how to use Ripple steps. Now, Ripple steps are used to describe any kind of process, including series or cycles of any kind of phenomenon. So I have a quick example here. I have a timeline built up that is a mock little documentary about the seasons of the year. So the way it's set up, I have a shot of spring going into a shot of summer. And then this gap clip represents a bunch of other clips, because generally when you're doing a transition from one step to the next, you then have a lot of discussion about what that step involves, whether it's a nature show or cooking or building a car or exercise class or whatever. This gap clip just represents a bunch of material that explains that particular thing. And here we would be talking about the season of summer. And then we would come back and finish with summer. It could be a different clip. I'm using the same one in this case, but it could be a different clip of summer going into fall, a gap clip representing a bunch of other clips, then fall into winter, and then winter back into spring. In this case, these are each still images. They could be video, of course, as well. Because they are still images, you'll notice that they don't actually match the frame exactly. I have an HD frame size, and these still images are not the same aspect ratio. So one tip here is I'm just going to select all of them. I'm holding the Command key down to make these non-contiguous selections. And then in the video inspector, if I scroll down to the spatial conform, I'm going to set that to fill so that they fill the screen. This will be helpful for them to fill the frame of their transition as well. So what we want to do is show a transition that goes from spring to summer and eventually throughout the whole thing. So Ripple steps are located in the transitions browser, and the icon for that's right here in the Ripple steps category. And the first thing you need to decide is, am I talking about a cycle or a series? So this first column are cycles and the second column are series. Cycles are things that repeat, that go over and over again. And you'll notice each of the little previews show basically kind of a cycle, a circle. You go back to step one again. Series, on the other hand, are kind of a one-way thing, like baking a cake or rebuilding a carburetor or any kind of process that starts at one point and ends with something different. So in this case, we have a cycle of seasons. So that's the first decision. Okay, we want a cycle, so we want this first column. And then is how many steps in the cycle. So we have options from 2 up to 7 steps. And you could actually go higher than that by always staying zoomed in. And I'll show you more about what I mean about that later. So you could do more than 7. But in this case, we have the 4 seasons of the year, so we have the 4 steps. So I'm going to take the 4-step cycle and I'm going to drag it on to the transition or the edit point between the clips. Let's also hit Command plus a few times to zoom in. And we can go ahead and play through that right now. There we go, and right away we have a transition. Now, that may be all you need to do in terms of selecting it. So that's step 1, is to apply it. Step 2 is to simply configure it. In other words, we've got an existing design, but we don't have any content in these drop zones. The other thing is these steps may not be in the right place. In this case, for us, they are. We want to start with spring, go to summer, go to fall, and go to winter. But we do want some content in these drop zones, and we want to change the title. So if I select the transition, then I go to the transitions browser, I can do some work in here. I'll just show you all the parameters. We'll go through these in just a minute. But you can also type directly on the screen here. So I'm going to just double click and then hit Command A, and I'll type spring for this title. Double click Command A, summer. Double click Command A, fall, and once more for winter, and escape. Okay, so that's one thing you generally going to want to label those so you don't just stay step 1, step 2, although you may generally have something that just wants to stay step 1, step 2. If I scroll down to the bottom, we have the drop zones. There are 2 drop zones here, and you can see they're labeled so it's clear what's what. So for drop zone 1, we want it to be the fall. So I'm going to click on drop zone 1. I'm going to go to my event library and choose this fall image. You can choose any image or video that you want. So I'll select that. And then I don't want to click apply clip yet because I can keep going. So I'm going to go to drop zone 2, which we see is for winter. I'll click in that well. I'll go back to the event browser and select this winter clip. And now that I've got both my drop zones in, I can click apply clip and it will apply all drop zones. That'll work, with as many drop zones as you want. So we could be finished right now. It's configured. We've got the right titles, and we've got the right content. So let's play that through. Okay, so that's step 2, is doing the basic configuration. Step 3 is optional, and that's customizing this. We can give it a completely unique look. One thing you may notice is after you've applied content to the drop zone, that the video inspector loses all those parameters that were there. So to get them back, all you need to do is deselect it, and then I'll move the playhead in the middle here, and reselect it. And we'll get all our parameters back. So let's take a look at some ways that we can configure it and some other things about the inspector. First of all, there are some quick tips that you can turn on as a reminder on how to work with this. Here's the 3 steps that we're going through here. You can turn those off at any time. The active steps in this case is correct. We are going from step 1 to step 2 for this particular transition, 1 to 2. We'll see when we go forward, we're going to want to move to different ones. But right now, the active steps is correct, step 1 to 2. The framing is a wide framing. That means that the camera pulls all the way back to reveal the entire cycle. Later on, you might not want to do that. Once people have seen the whole cycle once, they don't necessarily need to see the whole thing anymore, and you can choose different framing options. We'll come back to that. You can also adjust that framing option down here. Now for customizing, we've got different arrow styles. So we've got circled arrows, we've got curled arrows, drawn arrows, and even some chrome arrows. I'll go for the drawn arrows in this case, and now I can do some customizing. There's arrow colors right beneath it. If I pop open this gradient, I've got some options on how to colorize it. So I'll just change these to maybe something more of a green color. And depending on the arrow, these other tags, I'm right-clicking, by the way, on these arrows. You could just click on it and then choose a color in the color picker, but I'm just right-clicking on these color tags, and you can just see what they do here. Something like that. So you can fully customize, choose a different arrow and customize the color. Then you can change the text color to something else. In this case, I think I'll leave it where it is. And then there's a frame you can see on each one of these. Now to see the frame more closely, I will move the playhead forward just so we're zoomed in and you can get a better idea that you can change the frame color. You can change how round the frame is to either be kind of an oval shape or a rectangle. And you can choose to indent it. You can choose to extrude it. You can also choose to both indent and extrude for a look like that. I'll turn those off. Then there's a grunge frame option. If you turn that on, you might want to turn off the simple frame, and we see this kind of grunge frame, and then that can be assigned any color that you like. So let's choose that. And then I'm going to move the playhead back so we can see the middle of the transition again. From there, we have the option to add a title. So you can select that checkbox and you can name the title anything you want. So I'll just call it Seasons. Hit Escape. You can move this title anywhere that you want as well. I'll undo that. You can also change the font of the title or anything in here that you want, the size of the title, and the color, and I'll just make that black as well. There's a shadow opacity for the title that's behind it, and you can change the distance of that shadow and how much it blurs out. To give it a nice, I'll blur it out so you can kind of have it set off the background. And then you have some background options. So there's a gradient there by default. You can pop open this gradient editor and change the gradient. For instance, I could make this outside part more of a green, and then I could drag the tag in to bring it in tighter or make it wider. And you can add additional tags by clicking on this bar, and you can make those different colors. It'll be a little bit crazy here. I'll pull that off. But you've got full flexibility on what this gradient looks like. If you don't want to use the gradient, you can also choose to use a solid color background, and you can choose the color right down. Let's close this gradient for just a second. If we change the background to a solid color, then we've got this solid background color choices right here. You can also choose a drop zone. So for example, if I select drop zone, when we use this background drop well, so I click there, select something to go in the background, click apply, and then we've got some more options. Remember, we need to deselect and reselect the transition whenever you add drop zone content. And then for this background drop zone, we have a couple of options. We can pan and scale the drop zone content, so we can move it left or right. I'll undo that, or we can scale it. Now, this is a very important note. Final Cut Pro has this feature where you can double click on a drop zone in the viewer in order to pan and scale it, but do not do that. There is a bug in Final Cut Pro 10 where if you do pan or scale a drop zone by double clicking in the viewer, it will not render out and it will not appear if you copy paste. So you want to use these controls in Inspector if you want to change the position or scaling of the drop zone. You can also blur the drop zone, which is a great idea in this case because it kind of competes with the text and these images up front. So I'm going to drag the blur amount up. And if that blur amount of 64 is not enough, you can drag right on the value field itself to blur it even more. Below that, we have controls to adjust the font and size for each of the steps, steps 1 through 4. And then we have controls to adjust the panning and the scaling of the drop zones as well. So you can change the content in there. So you have full control over how your content appears in the steps transition. Okay, once you've applied and configured and customized your steps transition for your first step from 1 to 2, you're going to want to use it again to go to each step in your particular series or cycle. Now, you don't need to repeat all this work of building this up and customizing it. You can simply copy and paste the transition most of the time. One warning is that if you do use a background drop zone, don't manipulate the drop zone's pan or scale. That can tend to make the drop zone disappear and not appear when you copy paste. Here I've just reapplied the drop zone and not done any manipulation of its position or its size. So with this selected, I'm going to hit Command-C to copy, and I'll select the edit point of my next transition where I want to go from summer to fall. In other words, summer to fall. Here, I'll hit Command-V to paste. And if I place my playhead in the middle of the transition, we can see it's pasted in with all of the customizing and configuring we've already done. Now it looks a little bit weird because in this case we're going to be going from summer to fall, step 2 to 3, but it still thinks we're going from spring to summer. You can see our two clips on either side of the transition are summer and fall, which are up here, so they're in the wrong place. But this is really easy to fix. So what we do is in the transition inspector under active steps, it was 1 to 2 from here to here, but now we want to be 2 to 3, summer to fall. So we simply change to 2 to 3, and now we're going from summer to fall. Now these other two ones are the drop zones, and they're not correct. And just to make it clear, you don't have to clear them out, but just to make it clear, I'm going to hit the little X's to clear out those drop zones, and you can see those are true drop zones. And it also makes obvious what's what here when you fill them back in. So now we're going from step 2 to step 3, summer to fall. So if we play it through, we pull out of summer, and we push into fall. And then the only thing we have to do is put the correct content in the drop zone. So number 1 is winter. So I'll select the number 1 drop zone and select winter. And number 2 is spring. So I'll drop zone 2. I'll click on the well and choose an image for spring. And I'll choose this one here. Apply clip, and it's done. So you can see once you've done the work once, it's very easy to apply it down the line for your next step. Now the only other thing you may want to change, since people have already seen the whole cycle, they might not need to see the whole thing again. And what you can do instead is change this animation. So let's deselect and reselect the transition. And then in the inspector, let's look at the different framing options. There's a medium option. I'll select that. And if we play that through, we don't go quite as big. And then there's a close-up option. And let's play that through. And that kind of moves to the middle and then down. Now, you might not want those to work just that way. This is kind of clear what's going on because it's showing the title and coming down. But let's show you you can adjust these. So let's go back to the medium framing. And let's say, instead of centering this, we don't want it to do that. So I'm going to move the playhead to the middle of the transition, and then I'm going to use this adjust camera position. I'm going to click the disclosure triangle to reveal X, Y, and Z. And I'm just going to drag on these parameters because what I want it to do in this case, I'm not really caring about winter or spring. I'm really focused on summer going to fall. So I'm going to pull down over here and maybe even drag on Z to zoom in a little bit here. So I have full flexibility in framing this exactly the way I want. So maybe something like that. In fact, maybe let's move it even more over the other direction. So now if we play this through, the camera moves back but focuses on summer to fall. And that's all you need to do. Now, one thing you may want to do is have the camera stop when it pulls out. In other words, by default, the camera is pretty much always moving. It pulls out and pauses for a moment, just for a moment, to reveal the whole thing and comes in. But the first time that you reveal this cycle or series of steps, you may want to pause longer for your viewers to be able to take in what they're looking at, or you may have an ongoing voiceover that is explaining what the cycle is about. Here's how to freeze the camera for as long as you want on your ripple steps transition. What I'm going to do is select both clips on either side of the transition and the transition itself, and then choose File, New Compound Clip. I need to give it a name, and I'll call this one Season's First Step. And then I'll save it to the same event. You need to choose event to save it to. I'll click OK. And then this entire transition becomes one clip. Both the clips and the transition all become one clip. What's cool about this is, especially if I left my playhead parked right in the middle, I know I'm already in the middle. What I can do now is press Option F. And Option F will create a freeze frame. Let's hit Command minus to zoom out a little bit. We'll create a freeze frame right in between the left-hand and right-hand part of the transition. So if I play this now, we'll pull back out of spring, reveal the whole cycle, and freeze on it, and then come into summer. And what's great about this is, by default, this little freeze frame, if I press Control D, we can see it's 4 seconds long. I'll press Escape. But we can make this as long or short as we want to decide exactly how long we want to freeze on it to match our voiceover or to give people enough time to take a look at it. You can set it for any duration that you'd like. Once you've converted a transition into a compound clip like this, it's very easy to still make changes to it. All you need to do is double-click on either side of the compound clip. You don't want to double-click on the freeze frame, but either side here, you can tell by the little icon that this is a compound clip. So either one, it doesn't matter. I'll double-click on the left-hand side. That'll open the source compound clip. And here we are. Here's the transition. And just to make it clear, I'll select the transition, and I'll change the background from a drop zone to a gradient. So I've done that. I'll click the back arrow here to go back out to our timeline, and you'll notice everything updates. The compound clip on the left updates, the freeze frame updates, and the compound clip on the right updates. So everything updates with your changes. So still very easy to make changes to your transition. One final note, if you just wanted to change the overall animation speed without having the camera freeze, you can just change the duration of the transition. One way to do that is to drag on either end of the transition to do so. So you can make it longer or shorter and make the overall speed of the transition change. That's it for a few tips on how to use ripple steps. Hope you enjoy them. Questions you can send to support@rippletraining.com. Again, I'm Mark Spencer for Ripple Training, and thank you for watching.